She had the ultrasound photo folded inside her coat pocket. She had practiced what she would say. "We're having a girl." Simple. 4 words she had rehearsed 100 times on the flight from New York to Seoul. Then she opened the hotel's suite door, and a woman she had never seen before pressed her lips to her husband's throat, her fingers trailing possessively across the dragon tattoo beneath his collarbone. The tattoo Amara had kissed on their wedding night. The tattoo she thought belonged only to her. Dorian didn't push the woman away. He stood completely still, looking at his wife across the room, and said absolutely nothing. The ultrasound photo slipped from Amara's fingers and landed face up on the marble floor, a small gray image of a life that suddenly felt impossibly fragile. If you've ever walked away from something you loved because you were too hurt to stay, this story is for you. Subscribe now and follow every part of this journey. Drop your city or country in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Like this video so more people find it. You won't want to miss what happens next. The flight from New York to Seoul was 14 hours. Amara Rhodes, who had been Amara Vale for 2 years and still sometimes forgot, spent most of those 14 hours in a middle seat between a snoring businessman and a teenager with headphones so loud she could identify the song. She spent the first hour reading a gallery proposal she didn't care about. She spent the second hour pretending to sleep. She spent the remaining 12 hours pressing her hand flat against the barely there curve of her stomach and having a very quiet, very private conversation with someone who couldn't yet hear her. "Your father is going to be surprised," she said. Not out loud, just in her head, the way she had been doing for 3 months. 3 months since the nurse at the clinic in Manhattan had handed her a printed image of something that looked like a small gray comma and said, "Congratulations, Mrs. Vale." 3 months of carrying a secret that felt bigger than her body. She hadn't planned to wait this long. The first week, she had picked up her phone to call Dorian 6 separate times and put it back down. Then it became 2 weeks, and she told herself she was waiting for the right moment. Then it became a month, and she had to admit to herself that she was scared, not of the news itself, but of what the news would reveal about the space between them, about how wide that space had quietly grown while she was curating exhibitions in New York, and he was managing an empire in Seoul that she understood only in the vaguest, most carefully edited terms. Dorian Vale did not talk about his work. That had been made clear before the wedding, and she had accepted it the way you accept weather, something outside your control that you simply learn to dress for. What she had not expected was how much of him would stay hidden behind the same wall. She loved him. That was never the question. The question was whether love was enough to bridge 2 people who had somehow learned to live in the same world without ever fully occupying the same room. The answer, she had decided, was a daughter. That thought kept her warm through the entire 14-hour flight. She arrived at Incheon just before dawn, cleared customs with the practiced efficiency of someone who had passed through international airports more times than she could count, and took a car to the Vale, the hotel in Gangnam that Dorian used as a secondary residence when his schedule kept him in the city for weeks at a time. It was the kind of hotel that didn't advertise itself, the kind where the staff made eye contact exactly once and then became invisible, where your name didn't appear on any guest registry that could be accessed without 3 separate authorization codes. Amara had stayed here before. She had her own keycard, kept on a separate ring from her regular keys because that felt right. That felt like the kind of small, symbolic boundary that kept her sense of herself intact. She rode the elevator to the 23rd floor. She was already smiling. The nervous, too-wide smile of someone who has rehearsed a moment so many times that the real version feels like a performance. She was going to walk in. She was going to let him see her face before she said anything. She was going to watch the moment he understood. "We're having a girl." The elevator opened. The hallway was empty. Good lighting, the kind that made everything look slightly more expensive than it was. She walked the 12 steps to the suite door, pressed her keycard against the panel, heard the quiet click of the lock releasing, and pushed the door open. The room was not dark. The room was not empty. She registered the scene in pieces, the way the mind does when it encounters something it doesn't have an existing category for. A lamp on the far wall. The city skyline through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Her husband standing near the center of the room in a shirt that was not fully buttoned. And a woman. A woman Amara had never seen before, dressed in something that belonged to the space between evening and morning. She was beautiful in the specific, deliberate way of someone who had always known she was beautiful and had built an entire personality around the knowledge. Her hand was resting against Dorian's chest, not urgently, not like someone caught in the middle of something. Resting. Comfortable. Like she had every right to be exactly where she was. Her fingers were touching the dragon tattoo. That was the detail that broke something in Amara that she didn't know could break. The dragon tattoo beneath Dorian's collarbone. The one that stretched from his left shoulder toward his sternum. The one she had first touched the night he told her it was the only thing he'd ever chosen entirely for himself. She had traced it with her fingertip on their wedding night and asked what it meant. He had said, "It means nothing explains itself completely." She had laughed and told him that was the most pretentious thing she had ever heard. He had almost smiled. She had touched that tattoo 100 times. She thought she was the only one still touching it. The woman saw Amara first. She didn't flinch. She didn't pull her hand away. She turned her head with the slow, deliberate calm of someone who has been waiting for exactly this moment, and smiled. Not a caught smile. Not an embarrassed smile. A smile that said, "I have been expecting you. Sit down. This is my room now." Then Dorian turned. He looked at his wife across the suite, and the expression on his face was one she had never seen before. Not guilt. Not panic. Something worse. A kind of helpless paralysis, like a man who has just put his foot into a trap and understands in the same instant that fighting it will only make it worse. He said nothing. Amara became aware distantly of a sound, a soft, papery sound, and looked down to find the ultrasound photo on the floor. She hadn't felt herself drop it. Her hand must have simply opened. The small gray image of their daughter lay face up on the marble, and Dorian's eyes followed hers down to it, and she watched him understand what he was looking at. She did not give him time to speak. She turned around and walked out. She pressed the elevator button with a steadiness that surprised her. The door opened. She stepped inside. The door closed. The elevator descended. She did not cry. She couldn't locate her own breathing for a moment. There was just a hollow, mechanical sensation in her chest, like something had been removed while she wasn't paying attention. By the time she reached the lobby, she had made 3 decisions. She was not going to call him. She was not going to give him the chance to explain, and she was never coming back to Seoul. The decisions felt rational at 5 a.m. in a hotel lobby, while her body was still running on shock and 14-hour flight exhaustion, and the specific kind of grief that hasn't yet figured out what it is. They felt less rational at noon when she was sitting in a cafe near Incheon with a cup of tea going cold in front of her, staring at her phone and watching his name appear on the screen over and hitting decline each time with the careful, deliberate motion of someone diffusing something. 47 missed calls in 6 hours. She turned the phone off. She sat in that cafe for a long time and thought about the version of the morning she had imagined. Dorian's face when she said the words. The specific expression she had rehearsed him making. That rare, fractured thing that happened to his face when something moved him and he didn't know how to hide it. She had wanted to see that. She had flown 14 hours for that exact moment. Instead, she had this. She ordered another tea she wouldn't drink and tried to locate something practical inside herself. She had a passport. She had her own accounts. She had insisted on that before the wedding, and Dorian had not argued, which she had taken as respect and now wondered about in a different light. She had a return ticket to New York, technically, but New York felt impossible. New York was the apartment they shared when she was stateside. New York was the gallery that would expect her back on Monday. New York was a whole infrastructure of her life that had been built with Dorian quietly underneath it, and she could not go back there and exist in proximity to all of that and still be standing by the end of the week. She thought about her mother. Her mother, Adeze, who lived in a house in Lagos with a garden that smelled like rain and a kitchen that was always making something. Her mother, who had looked at Dorian Vale at their wedding reception with the specific expression of a woman who has raised a daughter through enough heartbreak to recognize the shape of the next one. Who had pulled Amara aside in the bathroom and said, very quietly, "That man loves you. I'm not sure he knows yet what to do with that. Be patient, but keep your eyes open." Amara had laughed and told her she was being dramatic. She booked a flight to Lagos from her laptop, using her own card, on a new email account she created in the cafe with a name that wasn't hers. It took 40 minutes and felt like dismantling a building brick by brick. She left the hotel reservation and the return ticket to New York and the life she had been living and took a cab back to the airport and did not look at the Seoul skyline as the city receded. She was 29 years old, 8 weeks pregnant, and had just walked away from her entire life with a carry-on bag and a cold cup of tea still sitting on a cafe table somewhere behind her. Her mother opened the door at 11 o'clock at night Lagos time. She took one look at Amara's face and did not ask a single question. She simply stepped aside, pulled her daughter into the house, and said, "I'll make yam pottage." Amara sat at the kitchen table and watched her mother cook and felt something in her chest start to come apart at the seams. Not dramatically, not in any way that felt like the movies. Just quietly, incrementally, the way a structure settles when the weight it's been holding gets redistributed. "He wasn't alone," she said finally. Her mother's stirring didn't stop. "No. There was a woman. I see." She had her hand on him. On his... She stopped. She was touching him like she owned him. Arez turned from the stove and looked at her daughter with the expression of a woman who has survived enough to know that the first version of a story is never complete, and who also knows that saying so would accomplish nothing right now. "Did he explain?" "I didn't give him the chance." Her mother turned back to the stove. "Okay. That was all. Just okay. Not you should call him or there might be more to this. Just okay." Which in Arez's language meant, "I am not going to argue with you tonight. You are here. You are safe. The rest can wait." Amara pressed her palm against her stomach. She hadn't told her mother yet. She couldn't do that tonight. Tonight she needed to be just herself, just Amara, just the daughter, just the woman who had flown across the world and come home with nothing but what she'd brought with her. Tomorrow she would figure out the rest. Tonight she ate yam pottage at a kitchen table in Lagos and let her mother sit across from her and not ask any of the questions she wasn't ready to answer, and that small mercy was enough to keep her from falling completely apart. Outside, on a different continent, 48 missed calls became 49. She didn't know that yet. She was already asleep. The next 3 months were the strangest of her life. She told her mother about the pregnancy on a Tuesday, sitting in the garden with 2 cups of tea that actually got finished this time. Her mother cried, briefly, privately, with her face turned toward the hibiscus plants along the fence, and then composed herself and said, "So we are having a baby." We. Not you. We. Amara held on to that word for the rest of the year. She did not contact Dorian. She didn't know how to explain this to people who asked, and people did ask, carefully and not so carefully, without getting into a version of the story she wasn't sure she trusted yet. The version she had was the version she'd seen, a woman's hand on her husband's skin, her husband's silence, the sound of an ultrasound photo hitting marble. That was her version. She'd decided to live inside it because the alternative, allowing for something more complicated, felt like weakness. Felt like something that could be used against her. She changed her phone number. She had a friend in New York quietly clear her things from the apartment. She filed the initial paperwork for a legal separation under her maiden name and listed a Lagos address she'd borrowed from a cousin. The lawyer was careful and discreet and did not ask unnecessary questions. She did not tell anyone where she was. She told herself this was strength. She told herself this in the morning when she woke up, and the first thing she thought about was Dorian's face. Not the face from the hotel, not the paralyzed expression, but the other face, the one he had when she said something that caught him off guard, and he forgot for a moment to be guarded. She told herself this at night when the baby moved and there was no one beside her to feel it. She told herself this on the bad days, the days when anger wasn't enough to cover what was underneath, when the thing underneath had a name that sounded too much like grief. Strength. That was the word she kept. 5 months in, she gave birth. The labor was 22 hours, which no one had warned her was possible, and her mother held her hand through all of it and cursed more than Amara had ever heard her curse, which was somehow exactly what she needed. When it was over, when the room was quieter and there was a small, warm weight placed on her chest, Amara looked at her daughter and said nothing for a long time. She had thought she would feel the loss immediately, the shape of who was missing. She had braced for it. Instead, she felt something simpler. Hello. Just that. Hello. She named her Nia. It meant purpose in Swahili, and it meant something slightly different in Welsh that she liked too, but kept to herself. Nia Vale, she wrote on the paperwork, and then crossed out Vale and wrote Rhodes, and sat with the pen in her hand for a long moment before she signed it. Nia Rhodes. It felt like an ending and a beginning happening at the same time. By the time Nia was 18 months old, Amara had built enough of a life that it almost felt like it had always been there. She was consulting for 3 galleries, 2 of which were Lagos-based, and one of which was a small but seriously regarded space in Accra that had been trying to get her for years. She had rebuilt her professional reputation from the Lagos address the way you rebuild anything, slowly, stubbornly, one good decision at a time. Her name was showing up in places it hadn't been before. She had opinions. She was being invited to speak at things. Her mother watched Nia 2 days a week and complained about it exactly the right amount. Nia had her mother's laugh, which was enormous and slightly chaotic, and arrived without warning in the middle of quiet moments. She had her mother's stubbornness too, the kind that manifested early, around 18 months, in very specific battles about shoes. She also had her father's eyes. This was not something Amara could think about for very long at a stretch. Nia's eyes were dark and still in the specific way of someone who is watching everything and processing it privately before they decide what to do with it. They were Dorian's eyes. There was no other way to see it. Sometimes Amara would look at her daughter across the breakfast table and feel something so complicated she couldn't name it. Love and loss and anger and a grief she hadn't yet finished moving through, all arriving simultaneously, all demanding something she didn't have enough of to give. She learned to move past those moments quickly. She learned to stay busy. She told herself that was enough. She was in the garden on a Thursday afternoon when she found the photograph. She had come back inside to get Nia's water bottle, which had been left on the kitchen counter, and she found the photograph sitting on the kitchen table. Not tucked under anything, not in an envelope. Just sitting there, in the middle of the table, where there was nothing 3 minutes ago when she had walked through to get outside. It was a photograph of her and Nia, recent. She could tell by what they were wearing, the market 2 weeks ago, the green dress she'd put on Nia, because it matched a scarf she herself had bought on a trip to the fabric stalls near Ojuelegba. She remembered that day. She hadn't thought anyone was watching. She turned it over with a hand that had gone very still. 2 words. In handwriting she recognized with a totality that hit her like cold water. Found you. She stood in her kitchen for a long moment with a water bottle in one hand and a photograph in the other, and everything she had spent 3 years building felt suddenly very thin, like a stage set, like walls that had no foundations, like a life she had constructed while forgetting that the person she was hiding from had resources she couldn't imagine. Her phone rang. She looked at the screen. The number wasn't saved, but she knew the country code. She picked up. "She has my eyes." Dorian's voice, lower than she remembered, something in it she had never heard before. Not quite broken, but something adjacent to broken, something that had been worn down by a very long time and a very specific kind of pain. She said nothing. "Amara." His voice said her name the way it always had, not as a word but as something older than language, something that bypassed the rational part of her and landed somewhere she had been trying to wall off for 3 years. "I need to see you. I need you to let me explain." "You had your chance to explain," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt, which surprised her. "You stood there and said nothing." "I know." "You watched me walk out and you said nothing." I know I did. You have every right." He stopped, started again, quieter. "She is mine." It wasn't a question. "That is not a conversation we're having on the phone," Amara said. "No, it's not." A pause. "I'll be there in 3 days." She almost said, "You are not welcome here." She almost said, "I will call the police." She almost said 100 things that would have been fully justified by any reasonable accounting of the last 3 years. Instead, she said, "Come then." She didn't know why. She would think about that later, would spend a long time thinking about it. And the best she could come up with was this. She was tired of living in a version of the story she had built alone, in the dark, with only her own anger to fill in the missing pieces. She was tired of carrying something this heavy with nothing to set it against. She put the phone down. Outside in the garden, Nia laughed at something, that enormous, slightly chaotic laugh. And Amara stood in the kitchen with a photograph of herself and her daughter in her hand, and waited for the world she had so carefully sealed shut to break open again. 3 days, he had said. He arrived in 2. Amara found out because her mother called her at 7 in the morning while she was still in bed, voice low and carefully controlled in the way it got when Adaez was managing something she hadn't yet decided how to present. There's a car outside, her mother said. What kind of car? The kind that costs more than this house. Amara sat up. Nia was still asleep in the next room. She could hear the particular quality of silence that meant the child hadn't moved yet, that deep, boneless sleep of a 3-year-old who had worn herself out the night before chasing a neighbor's cat around the garden. She pressed her hand flat against the mattress and breathed. How many people? 4 men outside. 1 staying near the car. I cannot see inside. Don't go out there. I was not planning to go out there, Amara. She got dressed in the dark, pulling on clothes without looking at them, and went to the front window. Her mother was right about the car. Black. New. The kind of vehicle that sat low on its suspension from the weight of its own reinforcements. 1 man near the front door, not aggressive, not displaying anything, just standing with his hands at his sides in the specific way of someone trained to be calm in a way that is itself a form of threat. The front door knocked. Not hard, not impatient. 3 quiet, deliberate knocks that somehow managed to sound more controlled than loud ones would have. Her mother appeared in the hallway, tying her wrapper, looking at Amara with an expression that asked the question without asking it. Go check on Nia, Amara said. Amara, Mama, please. Her mother went down the hallway. Amara went to the door and opened it. Dorian Vale was thinner than she remembered. That was the first thing she noticed, and she hated herself slightly for noticing it, for the instinct that cataloged him before she could stop it, the part of her that still knew his body the way you know the rooms of a house you grew up in. He was wearing dark clothing, nothing remarkable, no indication of anything except that whoever had dressed him knew what they were doing. His jaw was sharper. There were lines beside his eyes that weren't there 3 years ago. He looked like someone who had not slept well in a very long time. He looked at her the way a man looks at something he thought he'd lost permanently and is still in the process of believing is actually there. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Then she stepped back from the doorway and he came inside. She did not offer him anything. No tea, no chair, no version of the ordinary hospitality rituals that her mother's house ran on. She stood in the middle of the front room with her arms crossed and waited for him to say whatever he had come to say. He didn't sit. He stood near the door with his hands loose at his sides and looked at her. You look well, he said. Don't do that, she said. He closed his mouth, nodded once. Start talking, she said. You said you needed to explain. Explain. I want to see her first. The room temperature dropped about 10 degrees. No, Amara said. Amara, you don't get to walk into my mother's house and make demands. You don't get to... She doesn't know you. She has never seen your face. You are a stranger to her, and you will stay a stranger until I decide otherwise. That is not negotiable. He absorbed that. She watched him absorb it, watched the thing in him that would normally have pushed back make a calculation and stand down. That was new. 3 years ago, he would have pushed. 3 years ago, he had a particular way of occupying a room that made space for other people feel contingent on his tolerance of them. This version of him was different. She wasn't sure yet what to do with that. Okay, he said. Okay, you're right. I know I'm right. Start talking. He looked at her for a moment longer. That still, dark gaze that she had married and been unsettled by for 2 years and had spent 3 years trying to forget. And then he said, the woman you saw. Her name is Seo Yeon Park. She is the only daughter of Min Jun Park. The name meant nothing to her. He could see that. Min Jun Park controls the eastern distribution networks between Busan and Incheon. His family has been trying to absorb my operations for 4 years. When that didn't work through business, they proposed an alliance. A marriage alliance, Seo Yeon for access to my territory in exchange for a ceasefire with 3 other families they had consolidated. Amara stared at him. You were already married. I rejected the proposal, formally, in a meeting with Park and 2 of his attorneys 6 weeks before you arrived in Seoul. So what was she doing in your room? She wasn't supposed to be in my room. Something moved through his face, something tight and controlled that was the closest Dorian came to visible rage. She bribed one of my security detail, a man named Cho who had been with me for 7 years. She got access to the suite while I was on a call in the adjoining room. When I came out, she was already there. Amara said nothing. I was going to remove her. I was in the process of deciding how to do that without creating an incident that would escalate into something more serious. She was the daughter of a man who had already threatened. He stopped, recalibrated. The timing of your arrival, she knew when to expect you. She had someone watching the airport. The silence in the room was very loud. You're telling me, Amara said slowly, that she staged it. Yes. She knew exactly when I was arriving. Yes. And you... She stopped. Something was moving through her chest that she couldn't name yet. Not quite belief, not quite the opposite. Something suspended between the two, waiting for more weight on one side or the other. You stood there and said nothing. You watched me pick up. Her voice snagged. She straightened it. You watched me leave. He looked at her and his jaw moved once. I froze, he said. That's the truth of it. I have managed a great many things in my life, and I have never once frozen, and I froze in that moment because you were standing there and your face was... He stopped again. I didn't know about the pregnancy. I didn't know what you were holding, and then I looked down and I understood what it was, and you were already at the door, and I could not... You could not what? I could not make my legs move. He said it quietly, with the careful, undecorated honesty of someone who has spent a long time examining a moment and arrived at an answer they don't like. I have gone over that night 10,000 times. I know exactly what I should have done. I should have crossed the room. I should have said your name. I should have gotten between you and the door. I did none of those things. Why not? He was quiet for a moment. Because you looked at me like I was something unforgivable, he said. And some part of me thought, if she believes this, then something is already broken. Something that was already there before this moment. And that thought held me in place long enough for you to be gone. Amara's arms were still crossed. She became aware that her hands were gripping her own elbows hard enough to leave marks. You're blaming me for leaving, she said. No, I'm telling you the truth about why I didn't stop you. I'm not dressing it up. She turned away from him and walked to the window. The car was still outside. One of his men was looking at his phone. The morning was already getting warm. That particular Lagos morning heat that arrived before you were fully awake and settled in like it owned the place. I have documentation, Dorian said behind her. Surveillance footage from the hotel corridor. Financial transfers from Seoyeon Park to Cho. A full account from Cho himself. He talked in exchange for a reduced... He paused. He talked. Witness statements from 2 members of Park's staff who have since left his organization. A report from an independent investigative firm in Singapore that I hired specifically because they have no connection to me or my operations. Everything has been verified by a third party. She turned back around. You had 3 years to fabricate that. Yes, he said. I did. I know that. He held her gaze. I cannot make you believe me. I can only show you the evidence and tell you who verified it and let you check it yourself with people you trust. That is all I have. I'm not going to sit here and ask you to take my word for anything. She studied him, the thinness of him, the lines beside his eyes, the hands that were staying completely still at his sides in a way that cost him something. She could see it costing him something, the effort of not reaching, not pressing, not applying the kind of quiet pressure that had always been his primary mode of moving through the world. Where is she now? Amara asked. Seoyeon. Something shifted in his face. That's a more complicated answer, he said. Then uncomplicate it. She has been building a coalition, other families who lost territory or influence when I consolidated in the north. She has been doing this for approximately 18 months. The situation has become, he chose the word carefully, active. The word landed in the room with a weight it didn't look like it should have. Active, Amara repeated. There have been incidents, an attack on one of my remaining operations in Busan, a message delivered to my legal team in Seoul, and he stopped. And? A photograph of you and Nia was sent to me 4 weeks ago, taken at the market near Ojuelegba. The same photograph that was left in your kitchen. He held her gaze. She knows where you are. She has known for some time. I don't believe she would target you directly. The political cost among the other families would be too high, but I was not willing to continue operating on belief. The room was very quiet. From down the hallway came the sound of small feet on the floor. Then Nia's voice, still thick with sleep, talking to someone or something, possibly to herself, a habit she had that Amara found equal parts amusing and unnerving. Dorian's head turned toward the sound before he could stop it. And in the half-second before he controlled his expression, she saw something cross his face that she had never, in 2 years of marriage, seen there before. Something completely unguarded and completely devastated and completely, unmistakably real. Her mother appeared in the hallway doorway with Nia on her hip, Nia's head resting against her grandmother's shoulder, eyes half open, the large stuffed elephant she called Baba tucked under her arm. She was wearing her yellow pajamas with the small printed suns on them. She looked up. She looked at Dorian. Dorian looked at her. Adeze looked at Amara with an expression that was a very full sentence delivered in complete silence. I did not know he was here, and I was not going to keep her in the room, but she heard voices, and I could not hold her. Amara said, "Mama, Mummy, who is that man?" Nia said, not with alarm, with the pure directness of a 3-year-old for whom social editing had not yet become instinct. No one answered immediately. Nia looked at Dorian with those eyes, those particular dark, still eyes, and tilted her head to one side the way she did when she was deciding something. "You're tall," she said. Dorian made a sound that was almost a word and then wasn't. "Nia," Amara said, very carefully, I'm a friend of your mummy's," Dorian said. His voice had changed completely. It was the same voice and it was completely different. Something had gone out of it. The control, the measured quality, the specific timbre of a man who has been managing his own tone for so long, it became unconscious. What remained was quieter and rougher and more honest. "My name is Dorian." Nia considered this. "Okay," she said, and put her head back on her grandmother's shoulder and closed her eyes. Adeze caught Amara's eye again. Then she turned and carried Nia back down the hall. Amara turned to look at Dorian. He was still looking at the space where Nia had been. His jaw was tight. He pressed his lips together once. Then he looked at Amara, and she had the strange experience of watching a man who had built his entire existence around never being fully visible struggle with the fact that he was completely visible right now, that there was nothing left in him to hide behind, that whatever wall he had spent decades constructing had just been walked through by a 3-year-old in yellow pajamas carrying a stuffed elephant. "Sit down," Amara said. He sat. She sat across from him, and they faced each other across the low table in her mother's front room while the morning pressed in through the windows, and somewhere down the street someone was playing music too early, and the smell of something frying drifted under the door. She said, "Show me the documentation." He reached into the interior of his jacket and produced a flat document case, set it on the table between them. Didn't push it toward her, just placed it there and left it. She picked it up and opened it. She spent 40 minutes going through it. He did not speak. He sat across from her and let her read and did not perform patience or impatience or anything at all. She was aware of him the way you're aware of something large and still in your peripheral vision. Not threatening, just present. The documentation was thorough. She had spent enough years in professional circles that dealt in verification and provenance to understand what a fabricated paper trail looked like, and this didn't look like that. The Singapore investigative firm's report had a structure and a methodology that would have taken significant time and expertise to falsify. The financial records showed transaction chains that would require the cooperation of multiple independent institutions to manufacture. The timestamp data on the surveillance footage corresponded to system metadata in a way she could not check herself, but that the independent report had checked. She closed the document case. She set it back on the table. She looked at him. "Okay," she said. He waited. "I believe the documentation," she said carefully. "I believe that what it says is probably accurate. I believe that she was not your—" She stopped. "I believe you did not betray me physically. But," he said. She looked at him directly. "You had a marriage that produced a situation where a woman could walk into your hotel suite and touch you like she owned you, and it looked completely believable to your own wife. You want me to account for that?" He said nothing. "I was your wife for 2 years, Amara said. 2 years, Dorian. I knew about your business in the way a person knows about the weather. Generally, from a distance, with very little actual information about what was happening. You had people in your life I never met. You made decisions I never knew about. You had enemies I was never told existed. The woman who destroyed my marriage was a woman I had never heard your name mentioned alongside. I was protecting. You were controlling," she said. It came out quiet, and it came out steady, and it cut the air cleanly. You controlled what I knew. You controlled what I felt comfortable asking. You controlled the size of the world I was allowed to be in. And then when something went wrong in a part of your world, you had sealed off from me. I had no context for it. I had nothing to put it against. I had a scene and silence, and I made the only interpretation available to me. He sat with that. She watched him sit with it, watched him not reach for a defense or a reframe or the particular maneuvering that intelligent people use when they've been correctly identified. You're right, he said. I know I am. I'm not going to argue with you about that. You couldn't. It's the truth. It is. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees, hands loosely interlaced. I ran my marriage the way I ran everything else. I managed what people knew. I decided what was relevant. He exhaled. I thought I was protecting you. I know now that I was managing you. I know the difference. I didn't then. She looked at him for a long moment. Why didn't you tell me about Park? About the proposal? Because I had already rejected it. It was a handled matter. It was about our marriage. I know. It was a decision someone made about my life, and you didn't think I needed to. She stopped herself, breathed, kept her voice level. I was not a person to be protected in our marriage, Dorian. I was a partner. That was what I thought. That was what I signed up for. I know, he said again, and then more quietly, with the care of someone laying something down rather than throwing it. I know, I got it wrong. I'm not here to tell you I didn't. I'm here because my daughter is somewhere in that hallway, and I've been looking for the two of you for 3 years, and I'm telling you the truth about everything now because I have nothing left to be strategic with. Amara was quiet. From down the hall, faintly, she could hear Nia arguing with Adayez about something. The word Baba appeared several times. Whatever conflict was unfolding involved the elephant. She said, What do you want, Dorian? Right now, from this conversation. He looked at her. I want to know my daughter. And? He held her gaze. And I want the chance to be different with you. I'm not asking for it. I'm asking to work for it. There is a difference. She stood up, walked to the window again, stood there with her back to him. You need to go back to wherever you're staying, she said. You need to give me 2 days. I need to have the documentation independently reviewed by people I choose. I need to think. All right. And you do not come back to this house without my call. Your people do not approach this house. I find out you've had anyone watching us. I understand. I don't think you do. I want to hear you say it. He stood up. No surveillance on you or Nia without your knowledge. No presence at this house without your direct invitation. I will wait for your call. She turned around. And if I decide the answer is no, he held her gaze for a long moment, then I will find a way to have a relationship with my daughter that involves as much distance from you as you need, he said. I would rather have something than nothing, but I won't put that choice on you as a condition. She studied him. He looked tired, genuinely, deeply tired, in the way of someone who has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and has finally set it down and is now discovering what the years of carrying have cost him in muscle and bone. She nodded once. He picked up the document case from the table and held it out to her. Keep it. Give it to whoever you need to verify it. She took it. He walked to the door. She followed, not because she needed to show him out, but because she needed to see him go. Needed the visual confirmation of the door closing behind him, of the return of the ordinary morning, of the space between them restoring itself to something she could manage. He paused at the door with his hand on the frame. He didn't turn around. She really does have my eyes, he said, very quietly. He left. She stood in the middle of the front room with the document case in her hands and listened to the car start on the street outside and waited for the sound to fade. Her mother appeared in the hallway. Adayez looked at her daughter, at the document case, at the look on Amara's face that was not quite grief and not quite anger and not quite hope, but was composed of all three in proportions that hadn't settled yet. Well, her mother said. Amara set the document case on the table. He didn't do what I thought he did, she said. Her mother was quiet for a moment, then, no. You knew. I suspected. You didn't say. You were not in a place where saying would have helped. Adayez crossed the room and sat down in the chair that Dorian had been sitting in. She looked at her daughter with the exhausted, particular patience of a woman who has watched her child learn the hard way more than once and has made peace with the fact that this is how her child learns. "What are you going to do?" Amara sat down on the couch. She thought about Nia's face when she looked at Dorian. The uncomplicated 3-year-old appraisal. You're tall. No weight on it. No inheritance of the wreckage between the two people who made her. She thought about the look on Dorian's face watching Nia disappear back down the hall. She thought about 2 years of a marriage she had believed in, and 3 years of a story she had built alone, and the 40 minutes of documentation that had just restructured everything. She said, "I don't know yet." Her mother nodded. That was enough. That was an honest answer, and Adeyeze had spent her whole life preferring those to premature ones. What Amara did not say, could not yet say, was the thing sitting at the bottom of everything else. The thing she had been circling since she opened the door and found him there, thinner and tired and real. She had left without asking. She had made the largest decision of her life on the evidence of one scene and the silence of one man, and she had never, not once in 3 years, turned around to check if she had the story right. That was not something she could set down somewhere and walk away from. That was something she was going to have to carry for a long time, alongside everything else. Alongside Nia's smile and Dorian's eyes and the weight of the document case, and the still unfinished work of figuring out who she was on the other side of a mistake that could not be undone, only survived. Outside, the street was getting louder. A normal Lagos morning assembling itself, indifferent to the interior architecture of one woman's life. She sat with it. She was still sitting with it when her phone lit up with a number she did not recognize. Not Dorian, not her contacts, nothing she had any reference for. She picked it up. A woman's voice, precise, accented in a way that placed her somewhere between soul and somewhere that had tried to erase soul. "Mrs. Vale," the woman said, "my name is Seo Yeon Park. I think it's time we spoke directly, don't you?" Amara did not hang up. She stood in the middle of her mother's front room with the phone pressed against her ear and the document case still on the table, and the morning still assembling itself outside, and she did not hang up, which later she would identify as the first mistake of the next chapter of her life. "How did you get this number?" she said. "The same way I get most things," Seo Yeon said, carefully. Her voice was not what Amara had expected. She had been constructing a voice for this woman for 3 years. Something cold, something sharp, something that announced itself as dangerous. The actual voice was measured and almost pleasant, with the specific cadence of someone who had been educated in at least 3 languages and had decided English was the one worth perfecting. It was the voice of a woman who was accustomed to being underestimated and had learned to use that as a working tool. "I have nothing to say to you," Amara said. "That's fine. You don't need to say anything. You just need to listen." "I'm going to hang up." "You can. But before you do, I want you to ask yourself one question." A pause, precisely timed. "If my goal 3 years ago was to destroy your marriage, why am I calling you now to tell you the truth about what I did?" The room was very still. Amara's hand did not move from the phone. "I'm listening," she said. She hated herself for saying it. She said it anyway. "There is a meeting happening in 48 hours, Seo Yeon said, in Lagos. A gathering of representatives from 4 of the families who have aligned against Dorian. My father's organization is providing the neutral ground. The purpose of the meeting is to finalize a plan that has been 18 months in development." "What plan?" "To remove Dorian Vale permanently," another precise pause, "and to ensure that any leverage he might use to prevent that removal is also addressed." The word leverage arrived in the room and sat there with its full weight. Amara's breath moved through her very slowly. "You're talking about Nia," she said. "I'm talking about you both," Seo Yeon said. "Nia because she is his heir whether he has declared her as such or not. You because you are the only person he has ever made a decision that cost him something for. My father's coalition understands that Dorian's vulnerability is not his empire. It is the 2 of you." "Why are you telling me this?" A longer pause this time. Something shifted in the quality of the silence. Not hesitation, but something more deliberate. The pause of a person choosing how honest to be and deciding that full honesty is the only move left with any value. "Because I am not my father," Seo Yeon said. "What I did 3 years ago, I executed it because I was told to. I was 24 years old, and I had been raised to understand that my usefulness to my family was a function of my obedience to my family. I walked into that hotel room, and I did what I had been sent to do, and I watched a pregnant woman drop a photograph on the floor, and I told myself it was business. She stopped. I have been telling myself that for 3 years. I have become quite tired of it. Amara sat down. She hadn't decided to. Her legs made the decision before she did. You knew I was pregnant, she said. We had someone in the clinic in Manhattan. The sentence was so clean and so casual and so complete in its horror that Amara had to take a moment before she could speak again. You targeted a pregnant woman, she said. My father targeted a pregnant woman. I carried it out. The distinction arrived without defense behind it. I know the difference in moral weight is not significant. I am not asking for absolution. I am asking for 45 minutes of your time so I can give you information that will keep your daughter alive. Amara's eyes went to the hallway. Down there, Nia was still arguing about the elephant. She could hear her mother's voice now too, the particular rising and falling cadence of a diez, negotiating with a 3-year-old, which was one of her mother's very few activities that produced genuine exasperation. She thought about the photograph on her kitchen table. Recent. The market 2 weeks ago. Her daughter's face. Where? She said. I will send an address. Come alone. If Dorian's men follow you, I will not be there when you arrive. Give me a reason to trust you. I just gave you the only one that matters, Seo-yeon said. I called you instead of letting Tuesday happen. The call ended. Amara sat on the couch in her mother's front room with the dead phone in her hand and the document case on the table and the weight of the last 20 minutes stacking itself on top of everything else. And she thought, with a clarity that felt almost violent, that she needed to call Dorian. She thought about calling Dorian for approximately 4 seconds. Then she picked up her bag, kissed her mother at the kitchen doorway, said she had a work call that required a drive, kissed Nia on top of her head while Nia was too engrossed in the elephant dispute to fully register it, and walked out of the house. She was in a cab when the address arrived. It was 40 minutes across the city. She spent the first 20 minutes running scenarios and the last 20 minutes trying to stop running scenarios and simply breathing, which was harder. She was walking into a meeting with the woman who had taken apart her marriage with surgical precision and was now claiming conscience. That was either the truth or it was the second move in a longer game, and she had no way of knowing which one it was until she was already in the room. This cab stopped outside a building near the waterfront that looked like a mid-level import company, the kind of building that didn't announce itself, with a faded sign and a reception desk and the correct amount of visible mundanity to explain away any foot traffic. A woman in a dark blazer was waiting outside. She didn't speak. She simply held the door, and Amara went through. She was taken to a room on the 3rd floor, small. A table, 2 chairs, water that no one had poured, windows that had been covered with the kind of film that let light in and let nothing out. Seo-yeon Park was already seated. She was not what Amara remembered. Memory had made her mythological. The beautiful woman by the window, the hand on the tattoo, the smile that knew something. In person, she was smaller than that. Composed, certainly. Expensively presented. But there were shadows under her eyes that foundation hadn't quite managed, and her hands, flat on the table, were very still in the way that hands are still when they are working to keep from moving. She looked at Amara and she did not smile. Sit down, she said. I'll stand, Amara said. Seo-yeon accepted that. Thank you for coming. I haven't decided yet whether I should have. Keep talking. Seo-yeon reached into the folder on the table in front of her and slid 3 photographs across the surface. Amara stepped forward and looked at them without picking them up. The first was a photograph of a building she didn't recognize. The second was a schematic of something that looked like a floor plan. The third was a photograph of 6 men around a table, and she didn't know any of them except for one face in the far corner that she recognized because it had appeared in the documentation Dorian had left with her. A face identified in the Singapore report as one of Park's senior coordinators. The meeting is in 48 hours, Seo-yeon said. This building. My father has arranged it as a neutral summit, but the decision has already been made. The summit is a formality, a way of distributing the agreement across enough stakeholders that no single family carries the political exposure of having ordered it. Amara looked at these photographs. You said they were targeting Nia as leverage. As insurance, Seo-yeon said. There is a man named Ryu. He runs a separate operation, not part of any of the four main families, which is why Dorian's intelligence hasn't flagged him. He has been contracted to locate and hold you and your daughter as a guarantee that Dorian does not take retaliatory action before the summit is completed. If Dorian moves against the coalition in the window between now and the meeting, Ryu activates. Locate and hold, Amara said. That's a very clean way to say it. I know. How long has Ryu been contracted? Seo Yeon looked at her steadily. He has been in Lagos for 11 days. The room was completely quiet. 11 days. 11 days, which meant, while Amara had been thinking about the photograph on her kitchen table, while she had been watching Dorian sit in her mother's front room and speak in a voice she had never heard from him, while she had been reading documentation and making decisions about trust and running scenarios in the back of a cab, there had been a man in her city who had been there longer than any of that, watching, waiting, positioned. How many people does he have? 4 that I know of, possibly 6. And you know this because my father told me, Seo Yeon said. My father tells me things because he believes I am still entirely his. He believes the woman he sent into that hotel room 3 years ago is the same woman sitting at his dinner table. He is incorrect. Amara looked at her for a long moment. What changed? She said. Something crossed Seo Yeon's face. Not quite pain, not quite embarrassment. Something more private than either. He contracted Ryu for a similar operation 2 years ago, she said, against a family in Daegu. The woman held was 31. Her son was 5. She stopped. They were held for 9 days. After the situation resolved, my father called it a clean outcome. She looked at the table. I kept thinking about the 9 days. What 9 days looks like from inside it. What a 5-year-old understands about 9 days. She looked back up at Amara. Your daughter is 3. Amara's hands were at her sides. She could feel her own pulse in her palms. Tell me everything you know about Ryu's operation, she said. On one condition. You don't get conditions? One condition, Seo Yeon said again quietly, without aggression. When this is over, when Dorian has what he needs to dismantle the coalition and I am no longer useful to my father as an asset, I need passage out, documentation, a new identity. I have 3 million USD in accounts my father does not know about. I am not asking for assistance. I am asking for access to resources that can execute a clean exit. Amara stared at her. You want me to ask Dorian to help you disappear? I want you to pass the request to Dorian, yes. After what you did to us. Seo Yeon held her gaze. After what I did to you, yes. I know exactly what I'm asking. The audacity of it sat in the room like a physical object. Amara wanted to throw something. She wanted to cross the table and say things she had been building for 3 years in the dark. She had a reservoir of this, of rage and grief, and the particular bitterness of a woman who lost years of her life to something she had been told was one thing and was now discovering was another. And it was all right there, pressurized, ready. She looked at Seo Yeon's careful hands on the table. She thought about Nia in the yellow pajamas. Talk, Amara said. Seo Yeon talked for 37 minutes. She was methodical and detailed in the way of someone who had been cataloging information for long enough that the organization of it had become automatic. She covered Ryu's background, former military, 3 countries, specific areas of operational expertise that Amara did not need the details of to understand the implications. She covered the 4 families in the coalition, their leadership structures, their individual motivations, their individual vulnerabilities. She covered the summit's agenda, the sequence of events, the decision points at which intervention would be most effective. She had brought a second folder. She pushed it across the table. Amara took it. She opened it, and she recognized, with the stomach drop sensation of something arriving too fast, that what she was looking at was real. Different in texture and character from the fabricated kind. The specific irregular quality of genuine intelligence. Gaps where gaps existed, contradictions that hadn't been cleaned up, information sourced from different points that didn't perfectly align at the edges. This was not a prepared story. This was someone handing over the actual contents of their actual knowledge and accepting the exposure that came with it. Why didn't you go directly to Dorian with this? Amara said. Because he would have used me as an asset and then made a decision about my safety based on operational value, Seo Yeon said. With you, the calculus is different. You are the person I wronged. If you bring this to Dorian, the moral weight travels with it. He will honor it because you are asking him to. He won't honor it because I am. Amara closed the folder. She thought about whether that was manipulation and decided it was both manipulation and true, which was its own kind of complicated. I make no promises on his behalf, she said. I know. If he decides the operational calculus outweighs the personal obligation, then I will deal with the consequences. Seo-yeon looked at her steadily. I walked into your life and took something from you. I don't get to also demand a guarantee. Amara picked up the folder in her bag. She stood at the table for a moment, looking at this woman who had restructured 3 years of her life with a smile in a hotel room. She wanted to say something that expressed the full weight of what had been done. She couldn't find language that was big enough and also honest enough. Everything she could think of was either too much or not enough. She said, if this information is accurate and it holds, I'll pass your request. Thank you. Don't thank me. Amara said it quietly and without heat. I'm not doing this for you. She left. She was in the elevator going down when the full reality of what she was carrying landed on her with a completeness that was almost physical. 2 folders, Dorian's and now Seo-yeon's, and 48 hours before a meeting that had already decided what it was going to decide, and a man named Ryu who had been in her city for 11 days watching her daughter and who Dorian did not know existed. She called Dorian from the cab. He picked up on the first ring. Ryu, she said, do you know that name? A pause that lasted exactly long enough for her to understand that he did not. No, he said. Tell me. She told him everything. She spoke for 12 minutes without stopping, watching Lagos move past the cab windows. Vendors, traffic, the specific layered noise of a city that does not pause for private emergencies. And she told him everything Seo-yeon had said in the sequence she had said it, and did not editorialize and did not ask for his reaction until she had finished. When she stopped talking, there was silence on the line. Not the silence of someone processing, the silence of someone making calculations fast and not wanting her to hear the speed of them. Listen to me very carefully, Dorian said. His voice had changed again, back to what it was before the front room, before Nia, before the yellow pajamas stripped whatever protective coating he had left. This was the voice she had married and always been slightly afraid of without knowing why. Where are you right now? In a cab. Which direction? Heading back to my mother's. Do not go back to your mother's house. No rise in the volume, just a compression of everything into that specific calm that was not calm at all. Tell the driver to take you to the Echo Hotel. Give him the name and go in through the main entrance and ask for Mr. James at the desk and go where he takes you. Do not use your phone again until I call you. Dorian, Amara. 2 syllables, the way he had always said them, the way that bypassed her and landed somewhere older. The man she described has a particular way of operating. If he has been in position for 11 days and his window is tied to the summit timing, he is not waiting for an order. He is waiting for a signal. I need you in a location I can guarantee before I make any moves. She looked at the back of the cab driver's head. My mother is at the house with Nia, she said. I have 2 people 4 minutes from your mother's house. I am calling them right now with my other hand. Your people are going to show up at my mother's house. My people are going to be visible on the street outside your mother's house without entering it, which will make Ryu's people think before they do anything, which buys me the time I need to get them out. A brief pause. I will call your mother directly and explain. She will not like it, and she will tell me so, and then she will do what is necessary for Nia's safety, because she is a practical woman. Despite everything, despite the folder in her hands and the 11 days and the 48 hours and all of it, Amara almost laughed at that. Her mother, being correctly read by the man she had met twice. Fine, she said. She leaned forward and gave the driver the hotel name. Thank you, Dorian said. This is not forgiveness, she said. I know. I'm going to this hotel because of Nia, not because of you. I know, he said again, without injury, without using it. I'll call you in 20 minutes. She put the phone in her lap. Outside, Lagos was just Lagos. Indifferent, enormous, moving. She pressed her back against the seat and looked at the folder in her hands and thought about Seo-yeon's face when she said, Your daughter is 3. 20 minutes passed. Dorian did not call in 20 minutes. He called in 34, which was long enough for her to sit in a hotel room on the 7th floor with a bottle of water she wasn't drinking and work herself through several complete cycles of fear and anger and the specific miserable waiting that happens when you have handed a problem to someone else and have no visibility into what they are doing with it. When he called, she answered before the first ring finished. "Your mother and Nia are out of the house," he said. "They are with people I trust, and they are not at a location Ryu's network knows. Your mother was—" How did she react? A pause. "She told me 3 specific things about my character, and then she got in the car." This time, Amara did laugh. It was short and slightly ragged, and not really about anything funny, but it was real. "Seo Yeon's information is accurate," Dorian said. "The 3 names she gave for the coalition leadership. I have confirmed 2 independently in the last 30 minutes. The summit location matches intelligence I had from a separate source that I had not yet been able to contextualize. She is telling the truth." "I believe she was. You took a significant risk meeting her alone." "I know." Amara, "I know," she said, sharper. "I made a judgment call. It was the right one. If I had called you first, you would have come with me, or sent people with me, and she would not have been there when we arrived. She was very specific about that." Silence. "Yes," he said. "You're right." She sat on the edge of the hotel bed with the phone against her ear and the folder still in her hands and the water bottle untouched on the nightstand. "What happens now?" she said. "Now I use what Seo Yeon gave you to dismantle the summit before it happens. If the coalition cannot complete the meeting, the agreement does not formalize, and Ryu's contract has no sponsor to authorize it. And if you can't do it in 48 hours, he was quiet for a moment. "Then we go to contingencies," he said. "What contingencies?" Another pause, longer, with a texture that told her she wasn't going to like the answer before he gave it. "Dorian, the contingency is that I give them what they want," he said. "Territory. The northern operations. Everything they've been trying to absorb for 4 years. I hand it over formally and walk away from the table, and in exchange the coalition has no more reason to pursue an outcome that would require them to use you and Nia as leverage." She absorbed that. "You would give up the business," she said. "I would give up a business," he said. "There is a difference. I have other interests that are not relevant to any of this. I could rebuild, eventually, somewhere. That's not what I'm asking." She stood up. She needed to move. She walked to the window. "You would give up the empire your family built?" "Yes." "For us." He said nothing for a moment. "I already lost 3 years looking for you," he said. "I have spent 3 years running an empire I would have traded the day after you walked out of that hotel room if someone had told me it would bring you back." His voice was very level. Not emotional. Level, which was its own kind of emotional from him. "The empire is a tool. It was always a tool. I forgot that for a long time. I won't forget it again." The city was out there beyond the glass, enormous and moving and lit in the specific way of a Lagos evening, the day beginning to cool at its edges, orange going to pink in the distance over the water. She thought about 3 years, the cafe near Incheon, the flight to Lagos, Nia coming into the world in 22 hours while her mother cursed beside her. The garden, the gallery proposals, the careful brick-by-brick construction of a life that had felt real and complete and hers, and had always had this enormous shape of a man-sized absence in the middle of it that she had learned to root around without looking at directly. 48 hours, she said. "Yes." "You have 48 hours to end this without giving anything up," she said. "If you can't do it in that window, if it's between the business and Nia's safety, you do what you have to do. But I want you to try first. I want you to fight for it." She could hear his breathing on the other end of the line. "Why?" he said. She turned away from the window. "Because you built that thing over a lifetime," she said. "And because I'm not a woman who wants anything purchased at the cost of who you are. If you walk away from it, I want it to be your choice. Not a transaction, not a surrender." She stopped. "I want it to mean something when you do it, if you do it. Not just something you traded away because the arithmetic required it." A long silence. "Amara," he said. "Don't," she said. "Not right now. Go do what you have to do. We will talk when it's over." She ended the call. She stood in the hotel room on the 7th floor with the folder on the bed and the water bottle sweating on the nightstand and the city going to evening outside the glass, and she felt, underneath the fear and the exhaustion and the unfinished business of everything between them, something she hadn't felt in 3 years. Not hope exactly. Something harder than hope and less comfortable. The understanding that she had been half of a failure, not only the wronged party, not only the woman who had every right to leave, but also the woman who had left without turning around, who had built 3 years of certainty out of one scene and one silence, and had never once in all that time demanded the full story before she decided what the story was. That was not a thing she could fix tonight, but it was a thing she could hold honestly, which was more than she had been able to do an hour ago. She picked up the folder. She opened it again and read through it from the beginning, this time not for information, but for the thing underneath the information. The shape of what Seo Yeon had done and why, and what 3 years of living with that had finally cost her enough to produce this room, this table, this folder, handed across to the woman she had wronged in exchange for a chance at something that was not quite. She read the folder twice more before midnight. By the third pass, she was not reading it anymore, so much as sitting with it. The pages open on the bed, the lamp making a small warm circle in the otherwise dark room, the city outside gone quieter, the way Lagos goes quieter after 10, but never fully quiet. She was thinking about the shape of the next 36 hours, and how many ways the shape could be wrong. She fell asleep sometime after 1 with the folder still open beside her. Her phone woke her at 4:47 in the morning. Not Dorian. A number she didn't know. She answered it the way you answer a phone at 4:47 when you are sleeping in a hotel room in a city where someone has been watching your daughter. Without thinking, with everything immediately present. Mrs. Vale. A man's voice. Not Dorian's. Not anyone she recognized. Flat, accented, the accent belonging to no single geography she could pin. My name is not important. What is important is that the man you have been speaking with since yesterday morning is currently in a building on Lagos Island that belongs to a man named Ryu. He went there alone. He went there approximately 2 hours ago, and he has not come out. She was already sitting up. You work for Dorian, she said. I work for his interests, which at this moment include calling you. Why hasn't he called me himself? A pause that lasted exactly 1 second too long. Because his phone was left in the car, the man said, which is consistent with going into a location he did not want traced. It is also consistent with a number of other things. I am telling you what I know. I do not yet know which of those things is true. She was already moving, feet on the floor, folder off the bed, shoes. What building? I am sending the address now. I have a car outside the hotel, ground floor, east exit. Who authorized you to? He did, last night. He told me that if he did not contact me by 4 in the morning, I was to call you with the address and bring you to the car. Those were his exact words. She stopped in the middle of the room. He had known there was a possibility he wouldn't come out. He had gone anyway. And he had set up this call instead of telling her, instead of giving her the chance to argue against it, or participate in the decision, or know that the decision was being made. She thought about the word controlling that she had said to him across her mother's front room table. She thought about the specific, familiar shape of being managed by someone who believed that managing you was the same as protecting you. She thought about Nia. I'm coming down, she said. The east exit opened onto a side street. The car was black and unremarkable, and the driver didn't speak, which suited her because she had nothing to say during the 22 minutes it took to cross the city at 5 in the morning. She sat in the back with the address on her phone, a district she vaguely knew, near the water, industrial in the way of Lagos waterfront buildings that could be warehouses or offices or nothing at all depending on who was asking. Her hands were steady. She noticed them being steady and decided not to examine that too carefully. The car stopped a block from the address. The driver finally spoke, which was to tell her that going closer would be noticed, and that the man inside, he said the man inside without a name, had left instructions that she should wait at this point. How long? She said. He did not specify. She looked at the driver. He was looking forward. Whatever he knew, he had decided the limit of what he was going to tell her. She got out of the car. He said her name. Not her name, the honorific, Mrs. Vale, behind her. She kept walking. The street was empty in the specific way of very early morning before the city's first layer of activity has begun assembling itself. She could hear water somewhere behind the buildings, the harbor, the movement of something large and indifferent. The air was thick and salt-edged and warm, even at this hour. The building was a four-story structure that had once been something legitimate. She could see the ghost of a corporate signage fixture above the main entrance where the sign itself had been removed. Ground-level windows covered. Two vehicles outside, both dark, both with the slightly anonymous quality of vehicles belonging to people who didn't want to be identified by their vehicles. She was trying to determine the best approach to the entrance when the building's front door opened from the inside. A man came out first. Not Dorian. One of Ryu's people. She knew this not from any specific visual indicator, but from the way he moved, the way he positioned himself in the doorway with his back to the frame, the specific body language of a man ensuring a perimeter. Then Dorian. He came out walking under his own power, which was the first thing, and the first thing was enough to loosen something in her chest that had been held very tightly for the last 50 minutes. I was walking with a slight unevenness that she clocked immediately. The weight shift of someone managing a left side injury without making it visible. The careful additional fraction of a second on the right foot. His jacket was gone. His shirt had been white and was not entirely white anymore. Behind him came a second man, and behind that man was a third. They stopped on the pavement outside the building. The three men from inside arranged themselves around Dorian in the configuration of people who have not yet decided what they are doing next. Then from inside the building she heard another voice. Not a voice she recognized, speaking in Korean, speaking in the sharp staccato of someone giving instructions at elevated volume, and all three men on the pavement looked back toward the door. That was when Dorian looked up and saw her. His face did three things in rapid sequence: relief, then immediately something else, then the specific controlled blankness of a man who needs everyone else in the vicinity to see him being calm. She had stopped walking when the door opened. She was standing maybe 30 meters away, at the edge of a streetlight's reach, and she watched him look at her with the thing underneath his controlled blankness. Doing something complicated, and she stayed very still because moving felt like it would break something that was currently holding. One of the men near him said something. Dorian answered without looking away from her. The man looked at her, then back at Dorian. Then he made a decision, which was to step slightly to the side in the way that means, this is no longer my problem. The voice from inside the building came closer. Ryu. She knew it before she saw him because of what his voice was doing. The particular register of a man who does not raise his volume to show anger, because volume is for people who need to demonstrate force rather than simply have it. He came through the door, and he was shorter than she had pictured, which surprised her, and his face was the face of a man who had built a very specific professional reputation and was in the process of discovering that something had gone wrong with tonight's accounting. He looked at his three men. He looked at Dorian. He saw, apparently for the first time, Amara at the edge of the streetlight. Something shifted in Ryu's expression that was not quite recalculation, but was the moment before recalculation. Dorian said something to him in Korean. Ryu answered. Dorian answered back, and whatever he said, the man to Ryu's left moved. Not aggressively, but in the direction of the vehicle, which was a different kind of statement. She didn't have the language, and she didn't need it. She had been in enough rooms where business was being negotiated in a language she didn't speak to, read the substrate of it, the territorial geometry, who was giving ground and who was not. Dorian was not giving ground. This was notable given that he was standing outside a building that was not his, in a city that was not his, with blood on his shirt. Ryu looked at her again. Then he said something to Dorian in English, which she understood was for her benefit. The contract still stands. The contract's sponsor is gone, Dorian said. Park's northern representative signed off 4 hours ago. The coalition is fractured. You can call and verify that. Ryu looked at him for a long moment. He looked at Amara. He appeared to be running a calculation that involved variables she couldn't see. This is not finished, Ryu said. Yes, Dorian said. It is. Another long moment. Then Ryu turned and went back inside. His men followed. The door closed with the particular quiet of an old building's door, the kind of close that sounds like a decision being swallowed rather than made. The street was empty again. Dorian stood on the pavement and looked at her, and she crossed the 30 meters between them because she needed to be close enough to see his face properly, to verify for herself that the walking under his own power was the full story and not a performance for Ryu's benefit. She got within 3 feet of him and stopped. He was pale under his skin tone. There was a cut above his left ear that had been handled with the field-expedient approach of someone who did not have time or materials to do more than stop the bleeding. The unevenness in his gait was coming from his left side. She could see now, close up, that he was holding that arm slightly away from his body. "You need a hospital," she said. "Not immediately. Dorian, I've had worse, and I've had worse in worse places." He said it without bravado, just flatly, as a statement of fact. "I'm standing. I'm talking. Hospital can be an hour from now." She looked at him. She thought about saying several things, most of them beginning with the fact that he had gone into this building alone without telling her what he was doing, had structured the entire operation around her being informed after the fact, had set up the 447 call as a safety valve rather than including her in the decision to go in the first place, and that all of this was the same pattern with a different surface, the same architecture of a man who believed that protecting the people he loved meant controlling what they were exposed to. She thought about saying all of that. She looked at the blood on his shirt. "Is it over?" she said. "The coalition split at 2 this morning." He shifted his weight slightly, the left side compensating, a micro-movement that she caught and that he knew she caught. When Seo Yeon's information reached the right people in the right sequence, it exposed that Minjun Park had been negotiating separate terms with 2 of the 4 families behind the backs of the other 2. The summit is cancelled. The formal agreement is dissolved. Without the agreement, Ryu has no sanctioned contract. He said it's not finished. It's finished enough for tonight. He looked at her steadily. People like Ryu don't pursue personal agendas. It costs them their professional reputation. Once the contract is void, the incentive structure disappears. He paused. Minjun Park is the remaining variable. He still has motivation. What kind of variable? Dorian was quiet for a moment. The kind I have to manage separately and that I'd rather discuss when I am not standing on a pavement at 5 in the morning with a separated shoulder. She looked at him. At the shoulder he was holding away from his body. At the cut above his ear. At the pallor of a man who had absorbed something significant and was currently running on the specific fuel of situations that are not yet resolved enough to permit collapse. She said, "Where is your car?" "Around the corner." "Can you drive?" "No." "Then I'm driving and you're navigating and you're going to tell me every single thing that happened in that building on the way to wherever we're going." She turned toward the corner he had indicated. "And then we are going to talk about the fact that you set up a 447 call instead of telling me what you were doing." She heard him begin to move behind her. "Yes," he said. "That's not an answer." "It's an agreement," he said. They reached the car. It was the same black vehicle from earlier, the driver who had not spoken to her. She held the driver's door open until he got out with the diplomatic silence of someone who understood the situation without needing it, explained to him. And then she got in and Dorian got in on the other side with a carefulness that told her the shoulder was worse than he was performing it to be. She drove. He navigated in short, specific instructions. Left here, the bridge, then north. And in between the instructions, he told her what had happened inside the building. He had gone to Ryu directly because Seo Yeon's folder had contained, in its second section, Ryu's personal operational code, the private terms on which the man had built his professional reputation, the lines he would not cross regardless of contract, because crossing them cost him the credibility his entire livelihood depended on. Dorian had walked in and laid that out, not as a threat, as a business conversation. The coalition's fracture meant Ryu's contract had no legitimate sponsor. Pursuing it anyway would be a personal operation, which meant personal liability, which meant professional exposure. The math was simply unfavorable. "He hurt you before you got to the conversation," Amara said. "He needed to establish something first," Dorian said. "That's how men like Ryu operate. There has to be a demonstration before there's a discussion. It's a form of grammar." She gripped the wheel. "A form of grammar," she said. "I'm paraphrasing. You went in there knowing he was going to hurt you before he'd listen." Silence. "Yes," he said. She thought about a form of grammar. She thought about what a man goes through, what calculation he runs. When he decides to walk into a room, knowing the opening statement is going to be physical. She thought about what you decide is worth that, what sits on the other side of that arithmetic. She didn't say anything else for the next 4 minutes. The safe house was a flat in a quiet residential block. She knew it was a safe house because of the way the security worked. the specific sequence of the approach, the man inside who opened the door before they knocked. Inside, it was clean and functional in the manner of a space that had been set up to serve a purpose and decorated with exactly enough humanity to not feel like a cell. A woman with a medical bag was already there. Amara stood in the small kitchen while the woman worked on Dorian in the next room. She could hear the low exchange of voices, not the words, just the register of pain information being given and received professionally. She put water on because there was a kettle, and it gave her hands something to do. Araiz called at 6:15. Nia is asleep, her mother said immediately, in a bedroom that is very clean and has a lamp shaped like a giraffe. She has decided the giraffe lamp is her friend and has named it something I cannot pronounce. The pressure behind Amara's eyes was sudden and surprising. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me. Tell me what's happening." She told her mother a compressed version, accurate, complete enough, stripped of the details that would add fear without adding information. Her mother listened without interrupting, which was not her mother's natural mode and indicated the weight of what she was hearing. "Is he all right?" Araiz said. Amara looked at the closed door to the next room. "He will be." "Amara." Her mother's voice had shifted, gone from the register of managing information to the older register, the one that had been there her entire life, the one that knew things about her that she had never said. "Are you all right?" She leaned against the kitchen counter with the phone pressed to her ear. "I don't know yet," she said. "I think so. Ask me tomorrow." "I'll ask you tomorrow," her mother said. "Go be where you need to be." The call ended. The door to the next room opened, and the woman with the medical bag came out with the particular expression of someone who has done what can be done and is leaving the rest to time. She nodded at Amara and left. Amara went in. Dorian was sitting on the edge of a low bed with his left arm in a sling that looked fresh and his shirt gone, and a bandage above his ear, and the overall appearance of a man who had recently lost a significant argument with the physical world and was currently taking stock of the consequences. There was a glass of water on the bedside table. He hadn't touched it. She pulled a chair over and sat in front of him. He looked at her. She looked at him. She said, "You set up the 4:47 call." "Yes." "Instead of telling me you were going in." "Yes." "Why?" He held her gaze. "Because if I'd told you, you would have tried to stop me or insisted on being present, and either outcome would have complicated the approach. Ryu needed to see me come in alone. The calculation only worked if I came in alone." "That's operational," she said. "Give me the rest." He looked at his hands for a moment. "Because I didn't know if I was coming back out," he said. "And I didn't want you waiting for a phone call that didn't come." The room was very quiet. She sat with that. She sat with the image of him making that calculation at 2 a.m, operational necessity as the rational argument, the other thing underneath it, the wanting her not to wait in the dark as the human argument, and walking into that building carrying both. "You don't get to do that," she said. "I know. You don't get to make decisions about what I'm exposed to. I'm not a person to be protected from information about my own life. I told you that this morning, and it was still—" "You're right." He looked up at her. "I did the same thing. I know I did. I don't have a different explanation for it except that the instinct is very old and it overran everything else." He paused. "That's not an excuse. I'm naming what happened." She looked at him. At the sling and the bandage and the pallor and the 3 years of looking for something he had spent 2 years managing instead of having. "I'm going to need you to learn a different instinct," she said. "I don't know how long that takes. I don't know what that process looks like. But it has to happen, because I cannot be in something again where I am the last person to know what is happening in my own life." "I know." "Say it back to me." He looked at her steadily. "You will not be the last person to know what is happening in your own life. Not if I am part of it. I will learn to do that differently, even if the learning takes time I don't know yet how to spend." She stood up. She picked up the glass of water from the nightstand and held it out to him. He took it. She watched him drink and thought about everything that had accumulated since the morning before. The documentation, the hotel room, her mother's voice on the phone, Ryu's face outside the building, the blood on the shirt that was no longer there, the form of grammar she was still not finished being angry about, and thought about how much of it could not be resolved tonight, how most of it required a kind of time that didn't compress, that had to be lived through sequentially, day by day, in the specific and ordinary way that trust is rebuilt when it has been broken by multiple parties who each contributed to the break in different ways. She thought about what she had said to him on the phone the night before. If you walk away from it, I want it to be your choice. Not a transaction, not a surrender. She had meant it when she said it. She still meant it. She said, "What happens with Minjun Park?" He set the glass down. "I have to meet with him." "When?" 2 days. There is a conversation that needs to happen that cannot happen through intermediaries. He paused. "I will tell you everything before I go. Where, who will be there, what the range of outcomes looks like. I will not set up a call in case I don't come back. I will tell you what I'm walking into." She looked at him. "And if his terms require something you can't give," she said, "then I give the empire," he said, without drama, without the performance of sacrifice, just flat, like a man who has already run this calculation to its end and arrived at an answer and made peace with it. "I give the territory, the operations, the northern network, all of it. I walk away from the table with nothing except the three of us. If that's the price, it's the only price I am willing to pay." She sat back down. She sat there in the pre-dawn light of a safe house in Lagos with the man she had married and fled and spent 3 years trying to unmiss, and she felt the full weight of what was at stake pressed down on the room, not as fear exactly, but as the specific gravity of a moment that understands its own significance. This was not just a marriage in recovery. This was a man deciding, in real time and at real cost, what kind of person to become. And she was the witness to that. She had been made the witness to it by a sequence of events so improbable and painful and consequential that she could not have imagined it 3 years ago, sitting in a cafe near Incheon, watching Seoul recede. "Try first," she said again. "Fight for what you built. Don't surrender before you have to." "I will." "And then if you have to, then I will," he said, without looking back. She nodded. She stood up and moved toward the door because he needed to sleep, and because she needed to be in a different room for a while and find her own stillness, and she had her hand on the door frame when he said her name. Not as a request, not as the precursor to anything, just her name. She turned. He was looking at her from the edge of the bed with the sling and the bandage and all the evidence of a night that had cost him significantly, and his face had nothing strategic left in it. No management, no controlled presentation, no version of himself arranged for external consumption. Just the man. Just what was actually there. "Thank you," he said, "for the folder, for coming to the building this morning, for—" He stopped. "For not having decided yet." She looked at him for a moment. "Don't thank me for not having decided," she said. "That's not a gift. That's just where I am." She turned and walked into the next room. She heard him lie down. She sat on the couch with the window beginning to go from dark to gray to the first thin edge of morning color and thought about the meeting in 2 days, about Minjun Park and what a man like that wanted and how far what he wanted could be satisfied without taking something that couldn't be returned. About Seo Yeon, somewhere in the city, waiting to find out if the gamble she had made on the wrong side of her own family had been worth what it cost her. About Nia asleep in a room with a giraffe-shaped lamp that she had already named and adopted as a friend, because Nia moved through the world that way, finding the thing in every room that could be loved and loving it without waiting for permission. She thought about the summit that wasn't happening, the agreement that hadn't been signed, the 48 hours that had compressed into something less and survived it. And then she thought about tomorrow. Minjun Park sitting across a table from Dorian Vale, 2 men with the full weight of what they had both built and both lost and both weaponized against each other, trying to find the shape of a thing that could be ended rather than only escalated, and whether the space between what Park needed and what Dorian was willing to give was narrow enough to thread an outcome through, or whether it was the kind of gap that only one thing. The morning arrived the way mornings do after nights like that one, without ceremony, without accommodation, just light coming in whether you were ready for it or not. Amara had not slept. She had sat on the couch in the outer room of the safe house and watched the window go from black to gray to the particular pale gold of early Lagos morning, and she had thought about many things and resolved none of them, which was the honest outcome and the only one available to her. Resolution required time she didn't have yet. What she had was this: the present moment, her daughter asleep somewhere across the city with a giraffe lamp, and a man in the next room who had bled for something and was still breathing. That was enough to build a morning on. She heard him wake at 7, the specific sounds of a person adjusting to a new physical situation, the careful movements of someone recalibrating around an injury. She put water on again. When he came through the door, he was moving better than the night before. The sling repositioned, the pallor replaced with something more functional, if not quite healthy. He looked at the kettle. "You didn't sleep," he said. "No." He sat down at the small table in the kitchen without being asked. She put a cup in front of him. He wrapped his good hand around it and looked at the steam. "The meeting with Park is tomorrow," he said. "I know. I want to tell you the full shape of it before I go." He looked up at her. "Where? Who else will be there? What I'm asking for and what I'm prepared to accept." She sat down across from him. "Then tell me." He talked for 40 minutes. She listened to all of it, the complete picture, unglossy and unedited, the kind of accounting a man gives when he has decided that the previous version of himself is no longer operational and the new version requires a different set of habits. He told her about Park's remaining leverage and what he intended to offer to neutralize it. He told her about the territory he was prepared to cede, specific, named, quantified, and the operations he would close permanently and the ones he intended to transfer in ways that removed him from any ongoing exposure. He told her what the safest outcome looked like and what the second safest looked like, and where the line was between those and the one that required him to walk away from everything. He told her who would be in the room and what each person's interests were and how he intended to sequence the conversation. He told her where the meeting was and the name of the building and the district and what she should do with that information if she hadn't heard from him by 3 in the afternoon. She took notes on her phone, not because she needed them, but because writing something down made it real in a way that hearing it didn't, and she needed all of this to be real. When he finished, she looked at her notes for a moment and then she looked at him. "If he asks for more than you've drawn the line at," she said, "then I decline and I walk out and we move to the contingency." Which is that I dismantle everything preemptively, before he can take it, and the taking becomes the point. Park needs to be the one who takes. He needs the narrative of winning. If there's nothing left to take, the narrative collapses, and he has nothing to show the remaining families. He paused. "It's messier. It costs more. But it works." She put the phone down. "You've wargamed this to the end." "Several times, yes. And in every version you come out of that building." He looked at her steadily. "In every version that matters." She absorbed that. "Okay," she said. He blinked. It was such a small thing. The blink. The fractional surprise of a man who had prepared for more resistance. And she caught it and felt something in her chest that was too complicated to name, but was in the same family as tenderness. Not the tenderness of forgiveness, not yet. The tenderness of recognition, of seeing a person clearly enough to catch the small things they can't control. "Okay," she said again. "I want to call at noon regardless of where things are. You'll have it, and I want to see Nia today. I'll arrange it." "I don't need you to arrange it. I need you to tell me where she is so I can go myself." A pause. Not resistance. Adjustment. The old instinct hitting the new wall and finding it solid. "I'll send you the address," he said. She nodded. She saw Nia at 10:30. The location was a house in a quiet residential neighborhood that belonged to someone in Dorian's network. She didn't ask whose, she simply arrived and was let in and followed the sound of her daughter's voice to a back room where Nia was engaged in a deeply serious negotiation with a Daese over the correct number of biscuits that constituted a reasonable mid-morning allowance. The giraffe lamp was on the table. It had apparently traveled with them. Nia looked up and saw her mother, and the biscuit negotiation ended immediately. She crossed the room with the particular full-body commitment of a 3-year-old who has decided that something matters. And Amara crouched down and caught her, and held on to the warm, solid realness of her daughter, with a force that surprised them both. "Mummy, you're squeezing," Nia said. "I know. Give me a minute." Nia permitted this with the resigned generosity of a child who understands that adults sometimes need things that don't make complete sense. She patted her mother's shoulder twice with a small hand. "I named the lamp Gerald," she said. Amara laughed into her daughter's hair. "That's a good name." "I know." Nia pulled back and looked at her mother's face with those eyes. Dorian's eyes in her daughter's face. The permanent and daily evidence of something that had existed before the wreckage and would continue to exist after it. Are we going home? Soon, Amara said. Very soon. Nia accepted this and returned to the biscuit negotiation. Arez caught her daughter's eye over Nia's head. She said nothing. She didn't need to. The expression on her mother's face said everything that 2 days of extraordinary circumstances had accumulated into: the exhaustion, the relief, the residue of fear that takes time to metabolize, the love that had held a space for her even in the middle of all of it. Amara stayed 3 hours. She ate lunch at the table with her mother and her daughter and listened to Nia explain at considerable length the complete personality and backstory she had constructed for Gerald the Lamp, including Gerald's family of origin and his strong preference for a particular type of weather. She drank 2 cups of tea. She let the ordinary texture of the 3 hours do the work that nothing else could do. The specific medicine of the normal, of time passing in the company of people you love, of your child's voice filling a room. At 2 o'clock, her phone showed a message from Dorian. Noon call was late. Meeting went long. I'm out. I'll explain tonight. Night. All 3 of us are safe. She read it twice. She put the phone in her pocket. She looked at her daughter across the table, who was now trying to balance a biscuit on Gerald's lampshade. She thought, all 3 of us. She thought, he said all 3. He came to the house at 6. He knocked? Didn't use any key or any access he might have had, just knocked like a person arriving at a door they don't own. She opened it. He was in clean clothes, the sling still on, the cut above his ear reduced to a bandaged line. He looked tired in the deep structural way of someone who has been running on necessity for several days and has arrived at the moment when necessity has withdrawn and left the bill. He looked at her. She stepped back and he came in. Nia was in the back room with the Dais and Gerald. The sound of them came through distantly, some kind of story being told, her mother's voice going up and down with the narrative. She took him to the front room and they sat. He in the chair, she on the couch. Tell me, she said. He told her. Park had come to the meeting with more preparation than Dorian had anticipated, which was the first thing. He had brought documentation, not the kind Dorian had brought to Amara's mother's house. Not verification, but leverage. Specifically, a set of historical transactions from the early years of the Vale family's operations that, read in a certain light by a certain audience, could be used to create legal exposure. Not an imminent threat. The transactions were old enough and structured enough that any serious legal challenge would take years and might not succeed. But the threat of the process itself, the public version of such a challenge, was its own form of pressure. Park had laid it on the table without drama. He wanted the Northern Network, Dorian said. The full distribution infrastructure. Not shared access. Not a licensing arrangement. Complete transfer. Complete control. Complete erasure of my family's name from the operational history. He wanted to own it outright. He wanted to own it and to be able to demonstrate publicly that he had taken it. That was the distinction. Dorian looked at his hand resting on the arm of the chair. He wanted the story. The man who dismantled the Vale network. That's the currency in the world he operates in. And you. I gave it to him. The room was quiet. All of it, she said. All of the Northern Network, the Busan operations, the 3 subsidiary structures in Incheon, the import infrastructure that my grandfather built and my father expanded and I spent 15 years maintaining. He said it without visible grief and without visible relief, just flatly, with the exhausted precision of a man who has made an irreversible decision and is now accounting for it without decoration. I signed the transfer documents at 3:15 this afternoon. My attorneys witnessed it. It is done. She looked at him. The legal threat he brought, she said. He withdrew it as part of the transfer agreement. It goes with the table. And it's actually gone? Not restructured? Not gone, he said. I kept the properties in Seoul that are legitimate. The investment portfolio. A small number of business interests that were always clean and have no connection to any of this. Enough to live on, enough to build something different with, eventually, if that's what... He stopped. That's my problem. That's separate. What matters is that there is nothing left for Park to want, nothing left for Ryu's contract to protect, nothing left for any of the coalition families to pursue. The empire is gone. The target is gone. She sat with that. She thought about his grandfather's work, his father's, 15 years of his own, the thing he had inherited and expanded and defended and sacrificed a marriage for without understanding he was doing it. "Are you all right?" she said. He looked at her. The question seemed to land differently than he expected, not as sympathy, just as a genuine question asking for a genuine answer. "I don't know yet," he said. "I know it was right. I'm still locating what that feels like from the inside." She nodded. "Co Yeon," she said. "She has what she asked for." He had handled that, he explained, through a separate channel. Documentation, a new identity, access to the accounts her father didn't know about. She was already out of the country. He did not know where she had gone, and he had made a deliberate decision not to know. That particular debt was paid and the ledger closed. "Did you contact her directly?" Amara said. "Through an intermediary. I didn't think it was appropriate for me to—" He paused. "She wronged you more than she wronged me. What she was owed came from what she gave you, not what she gave me." That felt like a distinction that mattered. Amara sat quietly for a moment with that. She thought about the woman across the table in the room near the waterfront, the careful hands, the shadows under the foundation. Your daughter is 3. The specific sound of someone saying a sentence they had been carrying alone for long enough that saying it out loud cost them something. She hoped the new identity was a good one. She hoped the country was somewhere with weather Co Yeon liked. She did not know how to feel anything warmer than that, and she didn't try to manufacture it. Some things you could only wish well from a distance without warmth. And that was the honest version, and she was done with the versions that weren't honest. "Minjun Park," she said. "Is he satisfied?" "He has what he wanted, and he is a rational man. Rational men in his position don't pursue additional action after they've achieved their objective. It would be poor form." Dorian paused. "I won't tell you there is no risk for the next few months. Men in his world operate in ecosystems that have their own momentum. But the direct threat to you and Nia is resolved. I am willing to state that as a fact." "You're sure?" "As sure as I have been of anything." She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about all of it. The full inventory. The hotel room in Seoul, and the ultrasound photo on the marble floor, and the cafe near Incheon, and the 14-hour flight to Lagos and 22 hours of labor, and Nia's first word, which was no, appropriately, given who her parents were. 3 years of building a life out of a story she had built alone. The photograph on the kitchen table. 2 words in handwriting she recognized. The front room of her mother's house, and a document case and a man thinner than she remembered. Seo Yeon's hands flat on a table near the waterfront, a building on Lagos Island and blood on a shirt and a form of grammar. 40 minutes of complete accounting at a kitchen table with a cup of tea between them. The transfer document signed at 3:15, all of it, the whole shape. She said, "I need you to understand something." He waited. "I'm going to wake up tomorrow and be fixed," she said. "None of this. What you've given up, what Seo Yeon told me, what the documentation proved, none of it erases 3 years. I carried something alone for 3 years that I should not have had to carry alone. I made a decision about my marriage and my daughter's life based on one scene and one silence, and I have to live with having done that, and you have to live with having created the conditions that made it possible. That is not a thing that heals in a week." "I know," he said. "And the way you run, the way you managed me, the way you decided what I was allowed to know about my own life, that has to actually change. Not perform change. Not the version of changing where the structure is the same and the surface is different. The actual thing." "I know that too." "I need to hear you say more than I know." He leaned forward, the good arm resting on his knee, the sling making him slightly asymmetrical in a way that was the most human she had ever seen him look. "I will spend as long as it takes learning to be someone you can trust. I'm not asking you to decide that I already am. I'm telling you that is what I intend to do with whatever time I have. I will be transparent about my decisions. I will consult you before I act on things that affect our life. I will tell you the full shape of things even when my instinct tells me to protect you from them, and I will override that instinct every time." He held her gaze. "And when I fail at that, because I will fail at that, I'm not going to pretend I've already fixed a thing I've been doing for 40 years. I need you to tell me when you see it, not let it accumulate. Tell me." She looked at him. There was a long, full silence between them. Not uncomfortable, not empty, but the kind that has weight and content. The kind that exists between two people who have been through enough that silence has stopped being neutral. Okay, she said. He exhaled. Just that. A breath released with the careful control of someone who has been holding it for longer than the last 10 seconds. From the back room, she heard Nia's voice, clearer now. She had apparently finished with Gerald and was asking for something. Her grandmother's response came, patient and declining, which meant the biscuit negotiation had reopened. Dorian looked toward the sound. She watched him look toward the sound with that same unguarded thing that had crossed his face in her mother's front room 2 days ago. The thing she had no word for except that it was real, completely and verifiably real, the specific expression of a man encountering something he had no existing defense against. She named a lamp Gerald, Amara said. He looked back at her. I know, he said. Your mother texted me a photograph. She stared at him. My mother texted you. At 4 this afternoon, with a photograph of Gerald, and a sentence that said, verbatim, this lamp has better manners than you. Take notes. She pressed her hand to her mouth. She also, he continued with the careful delivery of someone who understood they were handling something fragile, sent a second message 40 minutes later that said only, don't waste it. Amara looked at the wall. She thought about her mother, Adeyes, who had held her hand for 22 hours of labor, who had sat across a kitchen table at 11 at night without asking the wrong questions, who had looked at Dorian Vale across a wedding reception and seen something that took 3 years in several countries and a significant amount of blood and a giraffe lamp named Gerald to prove. Don't waste it. She stood up. She walked to the doorway of the back room and looked in. Nia was on the floor, sitting cross-legged in front of Gerald, explaining something to the lamp with the concentrated seriousness that she brought to all important matters. Adeyes was watching her granddaughter with the expression of a woman who has outlasted enough things to understand that this ordinary domestic scene, a child and a lamp and an early evening and the smell of something cooking, was what survived, what was worth surviving for. Adeyes looked up and met her daughter's eyes. She said nothing. She didn't need to. Amara went back into the front room. Dorian was still in the chair. He looked up when she came back in. She sat on the couch, not far from him, closer than she had been. I want to go home tomorrow, she said. My mother's house. I want Nia in her room, and I want to cook in my mother's kitchen, and I want one day of nothing happening before I figure out what comes next. Yes, he said. Of course. And I want you to come for dinner, not to stay. To come for dinner and to let Nia see you at a table eating food like a person, and then to leave at a reasonable hour and give us space. He was very still. Yes, he said. I can do that. Nia will ask you questions, she said. She asks everyone questions. She will ask you what your favorite color is, and what your job is, and whether you've ever touched a real elephant. Answer honestly. Don't manage it. What do I say about the job? He said. Amara considered this. Tell her you used to manage a very large, complicated business, and now you're figuring out what comes next. She'll accept that. She's 3. She mostly wants to know about the elephant. Something happened at the corner of his mouth. Almost a smile. It made him look different, younger, or maybe just less armored, which amounted to the same thing. I have touched a real elephant, he said, in Kenya, 12 years ago. Then you have something to talk about. She stood up. He stood up. They were close enough that she could see the texture of the bandage above his ear, the careful architecture of the sling, the way he was distributing his weight to compensate for the shoulder without fully acknowledging that he was doing it. She said, I'm not saying yes to anything tonight. I want that to be clear. It's clear. I'm saying, come to dinner, and we see. We see, he repeated. Not as a question, as an acknowledgement. She walked him to the door. He paused there, his hand on the frame, the same way he had paused at her mother's door 2 days ago. And she had a brief and vertiginous sense of how much had happened in the space between those 2 pauses, how much distance had been crossed, and how much damage had been tallied, and how much had been irrevocably changed. He didn't say anything this time. He just looked at her for a moment with the face that wasn't managed, and then he nodded once, and he went. She closed the door. She stood in the front room for a moment and put her hand flat on the door and thought about the woman who had walked out of a hotel room in Seoul with an ultrasound photo on the floor behind her and had never once turned around. Who had built 3 years out of the conviction that leaving without asking was the same as being strong. She understood something about that woman now that she hadn't understood before. That the leaving had been necessary and the not asking had been a mistake. And both of those things were true at the same time, which was not a contradiction, but a fact. And facts could be held without being resolved. And some of the most important things in a life were facts that you simply had to carry with honesty rather than solve. She took her hand off the door. She went back to her daughter. The dinner was on a Tuesday. Aday's made jollof rice because she was not going to rearrange her cooking schedule for anyone, and this was communicated clearly and accepted without complaint. Dorian arrived at 6 with an orchid plant that nobody had asked for, but that Aday's placed on the windowsill with the minimal acknowledgement of a woman who appreciated the gesture and was not going to say so. Nia saw him from across the room and walked over with the directness of someone who had already decided what she thought. "Gerald is on the windowsill," she told him. "I see that," Dorian said. "Is that a good spot for him?" Nia considered this with great seriousness. "He likes the light." "That's good to know." "What's your favorite color?" she said. "Green," he said, without hesitation, without calculation. Green, like a man who actually knew his own answer. Nia accepted this. "Mine is orange, but sometimes blue. Have you ever touched a real elephant?" "Yes," he said. Nia's eyes went wide. "Where?" Amara watched this from the kitchen doorway and did not intervene. She watched her daughter interrogate this man for 11 minutes about the elephant. Its size, its temperament, whether its skin felt like what Nia expected, what the elephant's name was, whether the elephant had seemed happy. She watched Dorian answer every question with the same directness he had given the first one. No performance, no version of himself packaged for consumption. Just a man sitting on the edge of a chair in a kitchen in Lagos, talking to a 3-year-old about an elephant in Kenya with the totality of his attention. Nia eventually decided, on whatever internal basis 3-year-olds use for such decisions, that the elephant conversation was complete. She picked up Gerald from the windowsill, placed him on the chair beside Dorian with the gravity of a significant introduction, and went back to her grandmother. Dorian looked at the lamp. He looked at Amara. She raised an eyebrow. He looked back at the lamp. "Gerald," he said, very quietly, as a form of acknowledgement. She turned back to the kitchen so he wouldn't see her face. Dinner was long and specific and ordinary in the way of meals that matter. The small traffic of plates and refills and Nia spilling something and Adaezi's opinions about things that had nothing to do with anyone present. Dorian ate with his good hand and managed the logistics of a sling at a table without complaint and answered Adaezi's 3 careful questions about his plans with the same unglossy directness he had given Nia. At 8:15 he stood up and said he should go. Nia looked at him from her chair. "Are you coming back?" He looked at Amara. Amara looked at her daughter and then back at him, and she let the moment be what it was. Let it have the weight it had. The question inside the question, the 3-year-old's version of the same thing, all of them were suspended inside. "Yes," she said. "He's coming back." Nia accepted this the way she accepted most things, immediately and entirely, moving on to the next thing before the words had finished landing. Because when you are 3, you believe what you are told by the people who matter, and you don't hold it in reserve against future evidence, and you don't make the people who told you prove it before you rest. She envied her daughter that. She was going to have to learn a version of it that fit an adult, which would be slower and harder and would require all the repetition of small, ordinary evidence before it settled into anything like certainty. She knew that. She was prepared for it. Dorian said goodbye to Adieze, who looked at him for a moment and then said, "Same time next week," which was not a question. He said, "Yes." He looked at Amara in the hallway by the door. The same hallway. The same door. The evening behind her and the night behind him and the distance between them. Not gone, not pretended away, but different in quality now. Permeable. Something that could be crossed. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me. Show up next Tuesday." "I will." She opened the door. He went through it. She stood in the doorway for a moment, watching him go down the front path and through the gate and into the dark of the ordinary street. And she thought about standing in another doorway 3 years ago, watching a city disappear through a cab window. And she thought about how long it takes to learn that the hardest thing is not the leaving, but the returning. Not the walking away, but the standing still long enough to let something find its way back to you. She thought about the woman who had dropped an ultrasound photo on a marble floor and walked out without turning around. She thought, you did the best you could with what you had. She thought, you can do better now. She closed the door. Inside, her daughter was telling her mother a story about Gerald, and the story had become elaborate and ongoing, a serial narrative without an ending in sight, and her mother was listening with the expression of a woman who understood that this was exactly how the good things came back to you. Not in one sudden restoration, but story by story, meal by meal, Tuesday by Tuesday, until one day you looked up and understood that you were no longer rebuilding something. You were simply living. The kitchen light was warm and the evening was settling outside the windows, and Nia's voice moved through the house with the uncomplicated authority of someone who had no reason to be anywhere else. Amara went back inside and sat down at the table and let it surround her. That was all. That was enough.